Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we delve into a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is April 20th. On this day in 1999, the United States witnessed one of its most devastating school shootings when two students carried out a meticulously planned attack at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. The massacre resulted in the deaths of 12 students and one teacher, with over 20 others injured. Today, we're going to talk about this tragic event that not only shocked the nation, but also sparked widespread debates on school safety, gun control, and the influence of media on youth violence. Let's get started. The morning of April 20th, 1999 began like any other spring day at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. But shortly after 11 a.m., seniors Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold set into motion a plan that they had been preparing for over a year. What they initially envisioned as a bombing and mass shooting on an unprecedented scale. At approximately 11:10 a.m., Harris and Klebold arrived in separate cars and parked near the school's west entrance. Hidden inside their vehicles and duffel bags were an arsenal of weapons, including sawed-off shotguns, a semi-automatic carbine rifle, a Tech-9 semi-automatic pistol, and dozens of homemade explosives, pipe bombs, propane tank bombs, and Molotov cocktails. Their original plan was to detonate two large propane bombs in the school cafeteria around 11:17 a.m. with the goal of killing hundreds of students during the busy lunch period. They planted the bombs inside duffel bags and left them near cafeteria tables. If the explosives had functioned as planned, the casualties likely would have been far greater. But both devices failed to detonate. Realizing their bombs hadn't exploded, the two began their shooting spree at 11:19 a.m. near the west entrance. Their first victims were Rachel Scott and Richard Castaldo, who were sitting on the lawn eating lunch. Rachel was killed instantly. Richard was critically wounded. From there, Harris and Klebold moved into the school, firing indiscriminately at students and teachers. In the span of just a few minutes, they shot multiple students near the entrance, injured others on the staircase, and made their way toward the library, where the deadliest phase of the attack unfolded. At 11:29 a.m., they entered the library where more than 50 students and teachers had taken cover under desks and inside rooms. Over the next 7 minutes, Harris and Klebold methodically walked through the library, taunting students and firing beneath tables. They killed 10 students there and wounded many others. Some were targeted because of their perceived status: athletes, popular students, or those they associated with bullying. Others were just random victims. While police officers and SWAT teams surrounded the building, communication delays and uncertainty over the shooters' locations slowed their entry. Inside, Harris and Klebold wandered through the school, setting off small explosives and attempting to ignite their failed cafeteria bombs. One of those bombs did actually partially ignite and start a fire, but it was quickly put out by the school sprinkler system. At 12:08 p.m., inside the library, the two perpetrators sat down and took their own lives with gunshots to the head. By the time the attack ended, 13 people were dead, 12 students, and one teacher, Dave Sanders, who had heroically warned students to flee before being shot. He bled to death in a science classroom while waiting for help. More than 20 others were injured by gunfire, shrapnel, or while trying to escape. The school was declared secure at 3 p.m., but the horror of what occurred would resonate for decades. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were both seniors at Columbine High School. On the surface, they seemed like typical suburban teens. They were bright, middle-class students from stable homes in Littleton. But beneath that facade, the two had been quietly nurturing deep anger and violent ideologies for over a year. Eric Harris, 18, was intelligent and technologically skilled. He kept a detailed website where he shared violent stories, posted bomb-making instructions, and chronicled his hatred for authority and society at large. His writings revealed a disturbing mix of narcissism, sadism, and grandiosity. Many psychologists later suggested that Harris showed strong signs of psychopathy with an obsessive desire for control, a lack of empathy, and an inflated sense of superiority. 17-year-old Dylan Klebold was more withdrawn and introspective. His personal journals, which were recovered after the shooting, revealed a young man who was tormented by depression, self-hatred, and suicidal ideation. Klebold often wrote about feeling depressed, invisible, and hopeless, expressing a longing for love, acceptance, and escape from what he saw as a meaningless world. Despite their psychological differences, Harris and Klebold formed a dangerous partnership. Together, they fantasized about carrying out a violent act that would shake up the world. Inspired in part by other mass murders, violent video games, and a desire to outdo previous killers, they conceived a plan that they referred to as Judgment Day. Their goal wasn't just to kill, it was to make a statement and leave a legacy of fear and destruction. They recorded dozens of hours of videotapes, later dubbed the basement tapes, in which they outlined their plans, detailed their weapons, and spoke directly to the camera about their motives. These videos, which were withheld from public release for years, showed them laughing, posing with weapons, and delivering chilling monologues about their hatred of classmates, teachers, and society in general. In the months leading up to the attack, they amassed an arsenal. Despite being under probation for a prior incident involving theft, and despite Harris being flagged for violent online behavior, both were able to acquire firearms through straw purchases made by friends and older acquaintances. They also constructed more than 90 explosive devices, including pipe bombs and propane tank bombs. There's been a lot of misconceptions about Harris and Klebold. Both boys were involved in school activities. Harris played soccer and Klebold attended prom just 3 days before the massacre. They were not social outcasts, as was widely misreported at the time. They had a circle of friends, they attended parties, and they were largely invisible to adults in terms of behavioral warning signs. But we didn't know that at the time. At the time when all of this was unfolding in 1999, I was also a senior in high school, so this felt very real to me. And I remember that all of the news media was just painting them as these loners who had gone after bullies because they were pushed to their edge. So there were debates about that. There were debates about bullying, about if it was mental illness, was it the access to guns, was it the violent video games that they had been playing? I mean, these are questions that were asked over and over again for years. But experts now believe that the attack wasn't the result of one cause, but more because of a perfect storm of psychological disturbance, access to weapons, failed intervention, and a shared desire to make a deadly impact on the world. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold didn't just want revenge. They wanted infamy. The Columbine High School massacre shattered the illusion that school was a safe haven. It was one of the first mass shootings in American school to be broadcast live, unfolding in real time on televisions across the country and around the world. And I will say, again, as somebody who was a senior in high school at that time, in my mind, that was the very first school shooting that had ever happened. I had never heard of a school shooting before. It never even occurred to me that something like that could happen. So it truly did change everybody's perception of the world and of our country. And I know for those of you who are younger, who have grown up with active shooter drills and lockdown drills and the horror of everything that's happened on the news in the past couple decades, it must seem crazy to believe that we never thought that this could happen here in America, when now it's seemingly all that happens here in America. But like I said, when this was going on April 20th, the news copters were there. They were hovering right above the school, and I remember watching kids running with their hands behind their head because the police at the time weren't even sure who the shooters were. SWAT teams entered the school while terrified parents waited for news. and many of them learned of their child's fate from reporters, not from officials. In the days and weeks that followed April 20th, 1999, Columbine became more than just a tragedy. It became a cultural touchstone. It was a moment that forced the United States to confront the very real threat of violence in its schools, and it left an entire community and an entire nation in mourning. Within the school, the damage was physical, emotional, and psychological. The library, where the majority of the victims had been killed, was demolished during the school's renovations. The school itself remained closed for months, and when it reopened, students returned under a shadow of unimaginable trauma. Grief counselors were stationed on campus, security was increased, but the sense of safety had been irreparably harmed. In the community, funerals filled local churches. Thousands attended the memorial service held in Clement Park adjacent to the school. Crosses were erected for the victims on a nearby hill, though the inclusion of memorials for the perpetrators was met with outrage, and they were eventually removed. The pain of the Columbine families was raw and public. Some chose to speak out immediately, while others withdrew from the spotlight. But nearly all were united in the hope that no other family would ever have to experience what they endured. In the years that followed, survivors and family members channeled their grief into advocacy and education. Daryl Scott, the father of victim Rachel Scott, launched Rachel's Challenge, a school program promoting kindness and compassion as a way to prevent bullying and violence. Others founded nonprofits supporting gun safety, mental health initiatives, and victim support networks. Law enforcement tactics also changed. At the time of the shooting, police followed a containment model. That meant that they waited for SWAT before entering a building with an active shooter. This delay is what allowed Harris and Klebold to carry out their massacre unimpeded. After Columbine, protocols were rewritten. Officers were now trained to enter immediately in active shooter situations, which is a shift that has been subsequently credited for saving lives in the tragedies that have happened since. The shooting also forced a nationwide conversation about school safety. Schools introduced zero-tolerance policies for threats and violence, invested in resource officers, metal detectors, surveillance systems, and emergency response training. Yet these changes also sparked debates over over-policing and student rights. The media coverage of Columbine set new precedents. Early reporting was often inaccurate and claimed that the shooters were part of the trenchcoat mafia, or had been severely bullied, or had targeted specific groups. Many of these claims were later debunked, but they helped shape public perception and policy for years. The intense focus on the shooters also led to concerns about infamy contagion, the idea that mass killers are motivated by the promise of attention and legacy. Today, many experts and journalists advocate against naming perpetrators in coverage, which is a shift influenced by the mistakes made after Columbine. And I will say that, I truly would be hard-pressed to be able to name any other mass shooters other than Klebold and Harris. Even when I just did the Virginia Tech episode a few days ago, I had no idea what the shooter's name was. And I'm okay with that. In total, more than 20 major school shootings in the U.S. have since been directly linked, ideologically or symbolically, to Columbine. Some shooters have cited Harris and Klebold as inspiration, attempting to mimic or to outdo their attack. Now, over 2 decades later, America is still grappling with how to prevent these attacks, how to support our students in crisis, and how to heal after such an unimaginable loss. The events of April 20th, 1999 at Columbine High School not only claimed innocent lives, but also forced a nation to confront difficult questions about youth violence, mental health, and the measures needed to ensure the safety of students. It changed the way that schools look in this country, but just a few days ago, we had another school shooting, this time at a college at Florida State University in Tallahassee. So it just goes to show that even now, over 20 years later, the problem of school violence is far from being solved. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me here again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!